conference with the head coach and general manager where they said, not a bunch of dumb stuff. It's a new era, everybody! Hey, we absolutely love to see it. Competence, transparency, reality. Lots of things that we're not used to. And no questions about like ownership just changed like yesterday or why did it change in the future? None of that stuff. Just football. Real, genuine, interesting football stuff to talk about, and there is aplenty. We'll, of course, continue at 4:30 our countdown of the 10 most important commanders of the 2024 season. We will also continue our positional group previews with tight ends at 6 o'clock because Logan and my chat with Zach Ertz is at 5:30. So happy Commanders Tight Ends Day here on the Hoffman Show. It's different than National Tight Ends Day, but should be just as celebrated. But we do start with what Dan Quinn and Adam Peters had to say this morning, actually, when they spoke to the assembled media out in Ashburn. Long press conference. I wouldn't say short on detail, but also not super long on detail. And I would say the most important thing from like a news headline standpoint, I don't know if it's actually the most important thing substantively, but the thing that had to be asked, and thus it was asked first, is what is the status at quarterback in terms of how they are approaching Jayden Daniels, the number 2 overall pick? Is he the starter? What's Mariota going to do? Blah, 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 blah. Dan Quinn, he got teed up to respond, and I thought his response was both telling and interesting.
And I want you to know it's not a secret, but it is a journey and a process. And so as we're going, when he's ready, we'll know. And when he's ready, he'll also know. But as far as the reps go, obviously with him and Marcus and moving around, there'll be certain days that will feature more of another. But like I said, I'm glad that you brought it up, and certainly not a secret. It's a journey and a process. And so through practices, through scrimmages and preseason games, all the way down, that's where the journey will take us. And then I'm not trying to hold back the info, but when we know, we'll say it.
I appreciate that from Dan Quinn so much, because I feel like so often coaches play games with this stuff in a way that's not actually helpful. Because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers don't care right now whether Jayden Daniels is the quarterback week 1 or not. There's no advanced scouting for them to do. There's no nothing. There's literally no competitive advantage to holding that information. And I think sometimes it can mess with players. It just creates extra drama. It creates extra questions. And I think that if you're truly going to approach it where some days some guys are going to be featured and other days it's going to be the other guy, and you have a plan for that, and you know that it's going to change, and it just and you say like, hey, there's a process. We're going to look at the joint practices. We're going to look at all this stuff. And I'm sure there'll be a point where he gets asked about it. And he's like, guys, I told you it'd be a process. I told you to tell you when we tell you. And as long as there hasn't been some kind of evidence where it looks like they're lying to us, then fine. Because I do think at this point in time, they're going to play out the process true. I think that they're going to mostly have Jayden Daniels take the 1 reps because I think he was significantly better in the spring and he earned that. I think that there's a chance that he continues to just be better and we get a little bit of what we got last year where maybe the plan going in is to split, but if Marcus Mariota plays like he did in the spring, there's no real reason to give him 1 reps. But I do think that in the first week or so, you don't really have to do it day by day. You can go ahead and say, we're going to treat Jayden like the 1 for 4 days, Marcus for 3 days, and we'll revisit in a week. And if a week into camp, 3 days into padded practices, they're ready to name Jayden Daniels the starter, they'll just freaking do it. And so I do think that Dan saying out loud, and this is me taking him at his word, and, jokes on me if this turn, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, I'm like, yeah, I'm never believing Dan Quinn again. And in some ways, the joke will be on Dan because you only, when you come into a new job, you have credibility kind of given to you in some ways. We'll trust you until we have a reason not to, as a media, as fans, etc. But for right now, like I actually genuinely trust Dan Quinn. I think that he's telling the truth, and I think that there will be a process that plays out, and that process will inevitably end in Jayden Daniels being the starter, not because of some preordained decision, not because of some narrative, not because of anything other than the facts on the ground will be he's the better player. If what we saw in the spring is true, Jayden Daniels is not only going to be a better NFL quarterback in 2024 than Marcus Mariota, he's already a better NFL quarterback than Marcus Mariota. That's what we saw in the spring. Marcus has the chance to change that. Jayden has the chance to change that. Jayden plays poorly. Marcus plays well. Facts on the ground change. Well, then I'll be damned. We'll deal with that reality when we get to the first preseason game and both guys play. And if all of a sudden it's like, actually, we're not sure that Jayden's quite ready yet. And that's more what it's about, right? Like, to hell with what Marcus is doing to an extent. Like, if Marcus is unplayable, well, now all of a sudden Jeff Driscoll enters the chat. But realistically, it's about, is Jayden ready to play NFL football in a constructive manner? Because you do need reps to get better, but you have to be ready for those reps. You have to be at a point where the practice that you're getting, the reps that you're getting, even when you make mistakes, is constructive. That you're building good habits. You're not just stacking bad habits day after day and getting yourself in bad spots, and then that becomes who you are as a player. I think Jayden, what I saw in the spring, he's already past that. That's my personal take based off what I saw in the spring. Reserve the right to change my mind. It's July 23rd. But I do appreciate the fact that Quinn seems to be dealing in reality, not in narratives. And that was ultimately the downfall of the last administration, is they dealt in narrative chasing, not in changing the facts on the ground. And I don't think they were good teachers and a lot of other things that I don't know that they were capable of changing facts on the ground. So they tried to manipulate media narratives to try to change the story that was being told. But ultimately, in this town, the truth tends to come out. The people like Kime and Nikki, and I'd like to think those of us in the talk space, like, we're smart enough, and you all are smart enough as fans to not be fooled. And so when facts start to emerge in a certain way, we're going to know. And they're going to know. Jayden's going to know. Marcus is going to know. Terry's going to know. John Allen's going to know. Deron Payne's they're all going to know. And at that point, they'll deal with the reality on the ground, which is there is no freaking reason to not go ahead and name Jayden Daniels our starting quarterback. One other thing I wanted to play on the quarterback front real quick, and then we'll get to the rest of this press conference, which is how both Dan Quinn and Adam Peters have dealt with quarterback situations in the past, as they both, oversaw places where there was a young quarterback decision to be made. You think of Dan all the way back in Seattle, obviously with the DC, so he's watching from afar, but what they did with Russell Wilson. Atlanta was pretty simple. He just started Matt Ryan. But obviously AP has been dealing with musical chairs of quarterbacks in San Francisco ever since even before Brock Purdy got there, and then ultimately the decision to go with Purdy, etc., on down the list.
So I think it's one size doesn't fit all, and you want to make sure for not just at quarterback, but at any position. And development doesn't just continue to go straight up. There's some days it goes good, days not, and you keep pushing to go. So I think the biggest process, why I like training camp, sometimes I work from what I'm hoping to see, and then we start working back from there. So going through the offense, having an off season, do that helps a lot. But more importantly, the connection, the chemistry with the players, and really identifying the things that they do best, and then trying to build around that.
I think you nailed it there, but my experience with young quarterbacks too. Like DQ said, it's not one size fits all, and I think everybody can see when that's happening, when they're ready. That the team knows, the coaches know. So you don't want to fast track it, you don't want to slow it down. You just want to let it happen naturally. And I know these guys are going to be great in doing that. So
simple enough. I think that quarterback is different, right? You can't treat quarterback like everything else. It's a unique position in sports. But there's a lot of stuff that applies to quarterback in the same way that applies to other positions. Some of that is when a young player, especially who's ultra talented, is ready to take that step, it becomes very apparent. And in some ways, it's enhanced at quarterback because, if you're an offensive lineman or even if you're a wide receiver, like, you can go out there and win on routes and the ball doesn't come your way, or it can be schemed up that you actually don't really get a chance to showcase what you could do in another system. Like, it as an offensive lineman, like, I guess you just keep winning and it's like, oh, I guess that guy's ready. But there's not going to be these moments where you do stuff that's really next level because in more ways, certain positions are pass-fail versus the kind of gradient grade, like you can get a B at quarterback. I guess your frequency of win-loss gets you your grade at O-line versus levels of spectacular versus competent versus incompetent versus failing spectacularly at quarterback. And so because you have the ball every play, because you make decisions on basically every play, because you have so much responsibility, that stuff does become self-evident. And you have to understand as a coaching staff, okay, this guy can do enough to succeed the rate that we want him to. And at that point, he's quote-unquote ready. And that is true at any position. It just presents itself differently at quarterback, and it's going to present itself differently depending on what each quarterback can do. The things that are happening for Brock Purdy in San Francisco that let Adam and Kyle know that he's ready are going to be different than the things that Jayden Daniels does here to let Adam and Dan Quinn and Cliff know that he's ready to be their guy. What are the superpowers? That is something that Dan Quinn and Adam Peters talk about a lot. It's, in fact, one of the things I want to play for you next in terms of how they're going to make some of these roster decisions and how they're managing this team in a way that is much more intelligent than teams that we've seen the last couple of years don the burgundy and gold. More from Peters and Quinn next. 4:30, we reveal number 4 on our 10 most important commanders of the season list. It's the Hoffman Show, getting you ready for training camp here on the Team 980.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.